is something deeply unsettling about getting lost in the woods. Not because you might run out of food, not because a wild animal might find you first, but because sometimes, when you're far enough away from the nearest road, you begin to realize something much worse. You're not alone, and whatever is out there has probably known you were coming long before you ever noticed it. Tonight, we're going deep into the woods for 3 disturbing encounters that began as ordinary hikes, ordinary camping trips, and ordinary adventures. But none of them ended that way. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in the forest isn't something you accidentally find, it's something that finds you first. Story 1. The Man Who Walked Between the Trees. When I moved to the town of Briar's Hollow, I thought I had finally escaped the kind of life that never allowed you to hear yourself think. Before that, I had spent almost 30 years living outside a major city. Traffic started before sunrise. Sirens were normal. Neighbors were separated by walls so thin that you could hear arguments you had nothing to do with. I hated it. So when I got the chance to work remotely, I packed almost everything I owned into a rented trailer and moved to a tiny mountain town that most people had probably never heard of. Briar's Hollow was exactly what I wanted. 1 gas station, 1 diner, a small grocery store, a sheriff's office, and miles of forest in every direction. The town sat in a narrow valley surrounded by mountains. In the morning, fog would settle between the trees so heavily that sometimes you couldn't see the top of the ridgeline. I loved it immediately. Within a month, I had developed a routine. I worked from home during the week and spent almost every free day hiking. There were marked trails near town, but those became boring pretty quickly. The deeper areas interested me more. Places without signs. Places where the paths had been made by animals instead of people. I knew it wasn't always smart, but I carried a GPS, extra batteries, water, and enough supplies to spend a night outside if something went wrong. I thought I was prepared. Then I started seeing the man. The first time was outside the diner. It was late in the afternoon, and I was walking back toward my truck when I noticed someone standing on the opposite side of the street. He wasn't doing anything. He was just standing there, watching me. At first I assumed he was waiting for someone, but when I got into my truck and pulled away, he turned his entire body and followed me with his eyes. I saw him again 2 days later. This time he was standing beside the grocery store, then outside the gas station, then near the entrance to one of the hiking trails. The strange thing wasn't that he was in different places. Small towns are like that. You tend to see the same people everywhere. The strange thing was that nobody seemed to know who he was. He looked to be somewhere in his 60s, tall, very thin, always wearing the same dark brown jacket no matter how warm it was outside. His hair was completely white, but his face looked younger than the rest of him, almost unnaturally smooth, and every time I saw him, he was carrying the same thing, a long wooden walking stick. At first I thought it was just a hiking stick. Then I noticed something strange about it. There were dozens of small marks carved into the wood. Lines, names, dates. I only saw it clearly once, and one of those names was mine. I told myself I had imagined it. I had only seen the stick for a second. Maybe the letters looked familiar because I was expecting them to. Maybe I was being paranoid. That explanation lasted until the following Saturday. I had decided to hike a ridge about 2 hours outside town. I parked near an old logging road and started walking shortly after sunrise. The weather was perfect, cold enough that my breath showed in the air, but not cold enough to make hiking uncomfortable. For the first few hours, everything was normal. Then I heard someone walking behind me. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I turned around. Nothing, just trees. I stood there for almost a full minute. The forest was completely still. No birds, no wind, no animals moving through the brush. I continued walking. A few minutes later, the footsteps returned. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Always the same distance behind me. I turned again. Nothing. At that point, I took out my phone and checked the map. I was already far enough from the road that another hiker seemed unlikely. Still, I called out, "Hello?" No answer. I waited. Then, from somewhere deeper in the trees, I heard the sound of wood striking against a trunk. One sharp knock. I turned toward it. Nothing. Another knock came from my left. Then another behind me. I remember suddenly feeling very exposed, like the forest had become a room, and I was standing in the center of it. I decided to head back. Not because I was terrified. Not yet. Mostly because I didn't want to deal with whoever was following me. I turned around and started walking toward the trailhead. That's when I saw him. The old man was standing between 2 trees about 50 yards away. I froze. He didn't move. He was wearing the same brown jacket, holding the same wooden stick. For several seconds, neither of us said anything. Then I shouted, "Who are you?" He slowly raised one hand, not in a wave. He pointed past me, behind me. I didn't turn around. Something about the way he was standing made me feel like that was exactly what he wanted. Instead, I started backing away. His expression changed, not much, just enough for me to realize he was smiling. Then he said something, quietly, too quietly for me to understand. I asked him to repeat it. He did. "Don't let him hear you." Every hair on my arm stood up. I looked around him. There was nobody there. I asked what he meant. The old man lowered his walking stick. Then he whispered something else. "He knows you're coming back." I ran. I didn't care how stupid it looked. I turned and ran as fast as I could. Branches slapped against my face. My backpack kept bouncing against my shoulders. I didn't stop until my lungs started burning. Eventually, I reached a small creek that I remembered crossing earlier. I slowed down, and that's when I realized I could hear someone breathing. Not my breathing, someone else's. Slow, heavy, very close. I spun around. Nobody. Then I looked down at the mud beside the creek. There were footprints. Mine. And another set. Bare feet. The footprints had followed me all the way from the ridge, but they didn't stop behind me. They continued forward, toward the town. I stared at them for a few seconds before something caught my attention. There was another set of tracks beside them, a third person. I followed those with my eyes. They came out of the trees, stopped beside me, and disappeared. I left immediately. When I got back to Briar's Hollow, I went straight to the sheriff's office. The sheriff was a woman named Dana who had lived there most of her life. I told her everything. The old man, the carved stick, the footsteps, the footprints. At first she listened without interrupting. Then I described the brown jacket. Her face changed. She asked me to repeat everything I remembered about him, so I did. When I finished, she stood up and walked into another room. She returned carrying an old photograph. It showed 3 men standing in front of a cabin. One of them was wearing a brown jacket. He looked exactly like the man I had seen. Dana told me his name was Martin Vale. Then she told me Martin had disappeared almost 20 years earlier. His body was never found. He had been part of a search party looking for a missing teenage boy. The boy had gone into the woods and never returned. Martin and 2 other volunteers searched for him. Only 1 man came back. The other 2 vanished. The survivor claimed he had become separated from them during a storm, but according to Dana, there was one problem. Several months later, investigators found an abandoned campsite deep in the forest. There were 3 sleeping bags, 3 backpacks, and a journal belonging to Martin. The final page had only 1 sentence written on it. "Don't follow the man with the stick." I remember laughing when she told me, not because it was funny, because sometimes when you're scared enough, your body doesn't know what else to do. Dana asked me to show her where I had seen him. I refused, at least at first. But she insisted that if someone was living that deep in the woods, they needed to know. So the next morning, 2 deputies, Dana and I, drove out toward the logging road. We followed my GPS coordinates. Everything looked different during the day, less frightening, almost normal. We reached the creek. The deputies searched the area. Nothing. No footprints. No sign that anyone had been there. Then one of them called us over. There was something nailed to a tree, a small piece of wood. Dana removed it. My name had been carved into it. Underneath my name was yesterday's date. Nobody said anything. Then we heard a knock. 1 sharp strike against wood. Everyone looked toward the trees. Another knock came from farther away. Then another. Closer. The deputies drew their weapons. I remember Dana telling me to get behind her. Then the forest went silent. Completely silent. For maybe 10 seconds. And from somewhere behind us, a man's voice whispered, "Don't let him hear you." We all turned around. Nobody was there. But hanging from a branch directly above the sheriff's vehicle was a wooden walking stick. The same one I had seen. Carved into the side were dozens of names. I didn't need to look closely. My name was there. So were the names of the 2 missing search volunteers. And underneath mine, there was a new one. Dana. We left. The sheriff's department searched those woods several times after that. They never found the old man. They never found the cabin from the photograph. And as far as I know, they never found out what happened to Martin Vale or the teenager he was searching for. But I stopped hiking alone. I stopped going deep into the forest. And I haven't seen the old man again. Not in town, not on the trails, nowhere. But 3 months after that day, I woke up to a strange sound outside my house. A knocking sound. I looked through the bedroom window. There was nobody in my yard. The knocking continued. 1 strike, then another, then another. I eventually realized what I was hearing. Someone was hitting a piece of wood against the side of my house. The sound moved slowly around the building. I stayed inside until sunrise. When I finally opened the front door, there was nobody there. Just one thing lying on the porch. A thin strip of wood. My name was carved into it, and underneath it was a date. Tomorrow. Story 2. The tent that someone kept moving. The first time we heard the zipper move, neither of us was asleep. That was the worst part. My wife Emma and I were lying completely awake inside our tent when we heard it. A slow metallic sound. The zipper at the entrance was moving, not opening all the way, just enough for someone outside to test it. I whispered Emma's name. She didn't answer. Her eyes were already open. We both stared at the same spot. The tent door. The zipper moved again, a few inches, then stopped. And from outside, someone whispered, "Wrong one." The zipper slid back into place. Neither of us moved for the rest of the night. That happened during what was supposed to be our first real vacation after getting married. We had spent months planning a 3-night hiking trip through a remote section of national forest. We had camped plenty of times before. We weren't inexperienced. We knew how to set up camp. We knew what animals lived in the area. We had emergency supplies and satellite communication. We weren't doing anything reckless. The first day was perfect. We hiked for hours through thick pine forest and crossed a shallow river before setting up camp near a clearing. The weather was calm. We cooked dinner, took a few pictures, and spent most of the evening sitting near a small fire. There was nothing strange about the first day. The second day was when things started changing. Shortly after we began hiking, Emma noticed something on the ground. A blue ribbon. It was tied around a branch beside the trail. We assumed it was some kind of marker. Then we saw another one, and another. By noon, we had passed at least 20. Every ribbon was identical. Blue, old, faded by rain. I checked the map. There was no marked trail in that area. I suggested we follow them. Emma didn't want to. For some reason, she was convinced they had been placed there recently. I told her that was impossible. The fabric looked years old. We continued hiking. By late afternoon, we found another campsite. At least I think that's what it had been. There was a stone fire ring, a few rotting pieces of wood, and a metal cup lying on its side. It looked abandoned, but there was something strange. The ground around the campsite was covered in holes. Small, perfectly round holes. Dozens of them. They looked almost as if someone had repeatedly pushed the end of a walking stick into the dirt. Emma wanted to leave. I agreed. We continued until sunset and found another clearing where we set up our tent. That night, Emma kept asking if we should head back in the morning. I told her yes. There was no reason to stay. Neither of us was enjoying the trip anymore. We went to sleep early. Or at least we tried. Around midnight, I woke up. I thought I had heard an animal. I listened. Nothing. Then I heard footsteps. Slow. Soft. Walking around the outside of the tent. One complete circle. Then another. Emma woke up beside me. She whispered, "Do you hear that?" I nodded. The footsteps stopped near the entrance. Then someone laughed. Quietly. Not a loud laugh. More like someone trying not to laugh. I reached for my flashlight. Emma grabbed my wrist. She didn't want me turning it on. For almost an hour, the person stayed outside, sometimes walking, sometimes standing completely still. Once we heard something drag across the side of the tent, very slowly, from the bottom all the way to the top. Then the sound stopped. Neither of us slept. At sunrise, we opened the tent. Nobody was there, but our tent was surrounded by blue ribbons. Hundreds of them. They had been tied to grass, branches, rocks, even our backpacks. I couldn't explain how someone had done that without making enough noise for us to hear. Emma didn't care. She started packing. I helped her. We were leaving. Then we noticed something even stranger. The blue ribbons formed an arrow. Every single one pointed in the same direction, away from the trail, into the forest. We ignored it. We packed everything and started walking back toward our car. The problem was that after nearly an hour of hiking, we couldn't find the trail. I checked the GPS. It showed us moving in the correct direction, but the terrain didn't match anything I remembered. The river we had crossed was gone. The marked trees were gone. Even the ridge looked different. I checked the device again. It froze, then shut off. My phone had no signal. Emma's was the same. We decided to stop and think. That's when we heard the zipper. Emma looked at me. I knew exactly what she was thinking. The sound had come from behind us. There was no tent behind us. We slowly turned around. Nothing. Then the sound came again, a zipper opening, somewhere in the trees. We ran, not far, maybe 30 yards. Then we stopped because something was hanging from a branch in front of us. It was our tent, at least part of it, the rain cover. It was hanging between two trees. We had packed that cover ourselves. I remembered folding it. I remembered putting it into the bag. But there it was. The zipper on it slowly moved, by itself. Emma screamed. I grabbed her arm and we started running again. Eventually, we found the trail. I don't know how. One second we were surrounded by trees we didn't recognize. The next we were standing on the exact path we had used the day before. We didn't stop. We hiked for hours. Near sunset, we found the road leading back toward the parking area. Our car was still there. I have never been so relieved to see anything in my life. We threw our bags inside and drove away. Neither of us spoke for almost 20 minutes. Then Emma asked me something. She said, "Did you take the blue ribbon?" I asked what she meant. She pulled something from her jacket pocket, one of the ribbons. She didn't remember putting it there. Neither did I. I told her to throw it out. She rolled down the window, but before she could, I grabbed her hand. There was writing on it, tiny letters, almost impossible to see. We pulled over. I held the ribbon under the car's interior light. Someone had written a sentence across the fabric. "Welcome back." Emma started crying. She said that made no sense. We had never been there before, at least not that we knew. I threw the ribbon into a roadside ditch and drove home. For weeks afterward, Emma had nightmares. She would wake up convinced someone was outside our apartment. Sometimes she said she could hear footsteps circling the building. Other times she said she heard the zipper sound. I didn't hear anything. Then, about a month later, we received a package. There was no return address. Inside was a folded piece of blue fabric. I didn't open it. Neither did Emma. We put the entire package into a trash bag and threw it away. That night, our apartment door camera sent me an alert. Someone was standing outside. I opened the video. The hallway was empty, but the microphone was still recording. For several seconds there was silence. Then I heard a zipper, slowly opening, right outside our front door, and a woman's voice whispered, "Wrong one. Story 3. The room under the hunting cabin." The door beneath the cabin was locked from the outside. That was the first thing that bothered me. The second thing was that someone had recently scratched 3 words into the floorboards above it. "Don't open again." My friend Nolan opened it anyway. There were 4 of us on that trip. Nolan, Chris, my younger brother, Tyler, and me. We had been taking a camping trip together every autumn since college. Most years we stayed near established trails, nothing extreme. We weren't survival experts. We just liked getting away from work for a few days. That year we chose a part of the forest none of us had visited before. A local map showed several old hunting roads running through the area. We thought it would be interesting to explore. The first day was completely normal. We hiked, set up camp, cooked food over a fire. The next morning we decided to leave our equipment and walk farther into the forest. Around midday, Chris spotted something through the trees. A roof. At first we assumed it was someone's hunting cabin. As we got closer, we realized the building had probably been abandoned for years. The roof was partially collapsed. The windows were broken. Vines had grown over one side. There were no roads leading to it. No power lines. Nothing. Nolan wanted to check it out. The rest of us followed. Inside, the cabin was small. One main room, a rusted stove, a broken table, an old mattress in the corner. There were faded newspaper clippings covering one wall. Most of them had been destroyed by moisture. Chris found one still readable. It was an article about a missing hunter. The date was from the late 1980s. The headline said the man had disappeared near the same forest where we were standing. We joked that we should probably leave. Nobody actually did. Then Tyler noticed the floor. One section near the back wall looked newer than the rest. The boards had been replaced. We moved the broken table and found a metal ring, a trap door, and scratched into the wood above it were those 3 words, "Don't open again." Nolan immediately grabbed the ring. Chris told him not to. Tyler agreed. I didn't say anything. Part of me wanted to know what was down there. Nolan pulled. The trapdoor barely moved. There was a heavy lock attached to it, from the outside. Nolan took a small hatchet from his backpack and broke it. The smell hit us before the door was fully open. It wasn't exactly rotten. It smelled damp, earthy, like wet clothes left underground for years. Underneath was a narrow staircase, no ladder, actual wooden steps. The darkness below seemed too deep for the size of the cabin. Chris shined his flashlight downward. We couldn't see the bottom. Nolan went first, then me. Tyler. Chris stayed near the entrance. The stairs creaked beneath our weight. The deeper we went, the colder it became. Eventually, we reached the bottom. The room was much larger than it should have been. The cabin above us couldn't have supported a space that size. The floor was dirt. The walls were reinforced with old wooden beams. There were shelves along one side, and on those shelves were dozens of glass jars. Empty, except for one. Inside it was something that looked like a human tooth. I remember staring at it. Then Nolan called my name. He had found a second room. There was a doorway at the far end of the basement. No door, just darkness. We walked toward it. And then we heard someone coughing, a dry, painful cough. Chris shouted from the stairs. He asked if we heard it too. We did. The sound came from the second room. Nolan raised his flashlight. Hello? The coughing stopped. We waited. Nothing. Then someone answered. You're late. I felt Tyler grab my arm. The voice was male. Old. Very close. But we couldn't see anyone. Nolan stepped through the doorway. I followed him. The second room was almost empty. There was an old wooden chair in the center, and a rope hanging from the ceiling. The rope moved slowly, as if someone had just touched it. Behind the chair was a narrow tunnel. The coughing started again. This time from inside the tunnel. Chris shouted that we needed to leave. I agreed. Nolan didn't. He walked toward the tunnel. I grabbed his backpack and pulled him back. At that exact moment, something moved inside. A person. We saw the outline of a man crawling through the tunnel toward us. He was moving strangely, slowly, dragging one arm. His face remained hidden in darkness. Tyler screamed. We all ran toward the stairs, except Nolan. For some reason, he stopped. I turned around. He was staring at the man. The flashlight was still pointed toward the tunnel. Then the light flickered. When it came back on, the man was gone. Nolan looked at us. He smiled and said, "He said he knows me." Nobody answered. I grabbed him and pulled him toward the stairs. We climbed out and slammed the trapdoor shut. Chris dragged the broken table over it. Then we ran. We didn't stop until we reached our campsite. We packed everything immediately. Nobody wanted to spend another night there. On the hike back, Nolan barely spoke. He seemed distracted. Several times we caught him looking behind us. When we asked what was wrong, he said nothing. By the time we reached the car, the sun was setting. We drove to the nearest town and checked into a motel. That was when things got worse. Around 2 in the morning, Chris woke me up. He was standing in the motel room doorway. Nolan was gone. At first, we assumed he had gone outside. His wallet was still there. His phone was charging. His shoes were beside the bed. We searched the motel. Nothing. We called the police. While we were waiting, Tyler found something under Nolan's pillow. A folded piece of paper. The handwriting was old and shaky. It said, "He left me there. I had to wait." None of us understood it. Then Tyler noticed something written on the back. A date. The same year mentioned in the newspaper clipping. The police searched the area around the motel. They never found Nolan. His disappearance was investigated for months. Nothing. Eventually, the case went cold. A year later, Chris received a call from a detective. The police had found something while searching an unrelated area of the forest. The cabin. Or what was left of it. It had collapsed. The underground room had been exposed. Investigators found human remains. More than one person. One set belonged to the hunter from the newspaper article. Another set belonged to a man who had been missing for nearly 30 years. There were other remains that still haven't been identified. But they didn't find Nolan. They did find something else. His backpack. It was hanging from the rope above the wooden chair. Inside was his flashlight, still working. And wrapped around it was a piece of paper. The detective wouldn't tell Chris exactly what it said, only that it appeared to be a message. Chris eventually told me one more thing. He said that while he was talking to the detective, he asked whether the investigators had found the tunnel. The detective became quiet. Then he asked Chris why he knew about a tunnel. Chris explained. The detective said there wasn't one. There had never been one. The underground room ended at a solid wall. Chris still has nightmares about that. So do I. But what bothers me most isn't the cabin. It isn't the underground room. It isn't even Nolan disappearing. It's something I noticed months after the trip. I had taken pictures inside the cabin before we opened the trapdoor. I almost deleted them. Then I looked through them again. In one photograph, we're all standing in the center of the room. Nolan, Chris, Tyler, me. And behind us, near the old mattress, there is someone else. A man, thin, pale, staring directly at the camera. I zoomed in. His face was too blurry to identify, but I could clearly see one thing. He was smiling, and around his neck was a piece of rope. 3 different trips into the woods. 3 different moments when someone crossed a line they probably should have never crossed. A trail that should have been abandoned. A campsite that somehow knew who was inside it. And a locked door beneath a cabin that had been waiting for someone to open it again. The terrifying thing about the deep woods is that there are places where nobody can hear you. No cameras, no streetlights, no witnesses, and sometimes no clear explanation for what happened. So if you ever find yourself alone between the trees, and you hear footsteps behind you, maybe don't turn around. And whatever you do, don't follow the sound deeper into the forest. If these stories kept you listening until the end, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because there are more stories waiting in the dark. And the next one, might make you think twice before stepping into the woods again.